The New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission has become known among its peers as a progressive regulatory agency, presiding over what most everyone rates as the best private for-hire ground transportation system in the world. That wasn't me and Matt putting that together. These collective industries include taxicabs, liveries, black cars, and limousines, working together as a unique and collective whole to serve hundreds of millions of residents and tourists in every corner of New York City. However, the system in the last few years has become completely turned upside down by new initiatives with an incredible amount of opposition from almost every segment of every regulated industry, as well as from disabled passengers, resulting in several lawsuits involving the Taxi of Tomorrow, hybrid taxicabs, the Livery Street Hail Law, the e-hail smartphone program, and others. The TLC has stated that its only constituency is the riding public, but the New York City Charter says that the needs of these small businesses and of their diverse driver workforce must also be balanced when making policy. The question is, as mayor, if you were now seated at your first meeting with your new TLC commissioner, what would you tell him or her in terms of your administration's priority projects and initiatives, and how would they differ from prior administrations in terms of process and substance?
Great question, and let me commend all of the organizers here. This is a great forum. Looking forward to the discussions. Transportation is probably one of the most important services facing the city of New York. If we want to remain a true global city, we need to be able to move people around efficiently, have clean air, and address congestion issues. And we have some of the leading thinkers here that are asking questions on this important issue, which doesn't get as much attention as it should around the city. So I want to commend all of the people who put this together. My TLC commission would make sure that all the stakeholders would be at the table, Ira, to address these issues. One of the things that I think the administration has not done right is reached out to all the different entities when it comes to implementing policy. When it comes to the TLC, obviously you got to bring in the black car industry, the livery industry. All of those entities have to be together, and you have to solicit feedback. Well, I think the initiatives are good. The app initiative is a good initiative. The hybrid car is a good initiative. I really would like to see the city move towards accessibility, that all of our taxis would be accessible to the disabled in the city, like the City of London. We can phase that in. But my approach would be a little different, that I would try to ram these things through, that I would sit down with the industry leaders, work cooperatively with them, and develop a policy. We may disagree on some issues, but at the end of the day, I think people have to feel like they're being consulted and their ideas are being taken into consideration instead of ramming things through. We've seen that around the city in a number of areas, including development, big development, where communities feel left out. So you can rest assured in the Annapolis administration, those initiatives will go forward. I'm likening those initiatives that they've put into place, but it will be done in a consultative fashion with people from the industry.
Mr. Thompson, in terms of what Mr. Albany said, he mentioned some good ideas in terms of generalities of bringing stakeholders to the table. I don't think anyone could criticize the current administration that they brought people in to speak to, but I don't know if you have any ideas in terms of specifics, in terms of things that could be done in that area.
Well, I think that the one thing, and in speaking to people in different areas, in different industries within transportation that deal with the TLC, I think a lot of them have indicated they haven't been listened to, that the administration has become more about edict coming from the administration than discussion and collaboration. So, I think you always want to work with, what your priority is make sure that there's service, and service being provided across the city of New York to all 5 boroughs. That clearly has to be a priority. At the same point, you speak to individuals in different industries, they really feel they haven't been spoken to. And that, with certain adjustments, they could have been included, that it would have been more palatable to them. So I think that, as you look at, at the need for collaboration, the need to listen to the industries as you make the decision, and then check with them. I mean, I'm not going to say you're not going to give people veto and you don't want to slow things up, but I think a deliberative and collaborative process doesn't hurt you. And I think you're seeing that now as you move forward as you move forward with new legislation. There are people who express concern that if it would have been tweaked slightly differently, it would have worked out a lot better. You could have come to serious agreement if there would have been that need and desire. And I just think that the indication has been that wasn't there. That people had positions before they walked through the door, that it became more about revenue than it was about service generation. And that has been a concern, will continue to be a concern. You want to make sure that more than anything, it is about service and making sure that there's equity in that service. But at the same point, it is also in speaking to the stakeholders in bringing them to the table and trying to hammer out, positive direction. That has to occur.
Charles,
Yes.
Yeah, let me, Charles, I want to say, you're more familiar possibly with transportation issues. We've had our conversations in the past.
Yes, we have.
And in addition to your legislative background, I don't know if you have any specifics that you possibly
I think the Taxi and Limousine Commission does serve a number of statutory constituencies. And this is one of the agencies that needs a great deal more sunlight into how it operates, how it carries out its functions. Take, for example, some of the glaring inconsistencies we have seen over recent years. The Taxi of Tomorrow. The Taxi of Tomorrow, which was a years-long project that wound up, in my opinion, producing a taxi of yesteryear. Because it lacked some of the most basic modern amenities, and it lacked the ability to carry a growing number of New Yorkers. Right off the bat, 80,000 New Yorkers unable to use the Taxi of Tomorrow because it did not have wheelchair accessibility. So after a years-long study and this competition, couldn't we have gone a better Taxi of Tomorrow? It led me to reject that Taxi of Tomorrow contract, and right now, the whole thing is up in the air in terms of how much revenue we can actually produce from that whole project. Another inconsistency. A long time ago, about 10 years ago, there was a movement to introduce more cleaner vehicles into our taxi cab fleet. And there was city council legislation that introduced a small number, just a couple of hundred vehicles whose medallions would have which would have to be attached to vehicles which were clean air vehicles. And yet the Tax and Limousine Commission took forever to designate a vehicle that those medallions could be attached to. Why? Because the TLC claimed that they needed to test vehicles to ensure that the hybrid vehicles to ensure that they were safe for the road. And it took an additional piece of city council legislation to finally get the TLC to designate a vehicle within a certain time frame. Fast forward a couple of years, Mayor Bloomberg gives his famous Earth Day speech, including the Plan NYC 2030, which in general I support, but it arbitrarily assigned a mileage per gallon mandate on all taxi cabs within a certain amount of time. And so the TLC then went ahead and started looking at vehicles that could meet the arbitrary 25 mile per gallon limit. And yet there were no safety tests conducted on those. So it was just a lot of these arbitrary seeming flip-flops that render the TLC's operation far more opaque than other city agencies. And we do have to introduce the transparency and therefore public accountability on what this agency does.
Okay, thank you. And Congressman Wiener, the same question as far as
first let me just echo some of the things that Controller Lou said. I think, and I haven't done the research, I bet you've seen more executive meetings, more closed sessions at the beginning and end, at the beginning of TLC meetings than you've seen in any administration for years. Enormous amount of activity going on behind closed doors. Secondly, I think there's a philosophical bent that's come out that's actually anti-free market. My problem with the Taxi of Tomorrow, in addition to the idea, if you were to stop 100 New Yorkers and say we're going to pick a taxi for the future, and it won't be a hybrid, or it won't be, how about this? It won't exist. I think the problem, a lot of New Yorkers would say, what are you, crazy? And then if you went on to say to them, well, and we're going to use one company. So there's a recall on brake pads for the Taxi of Tomorrow. What happens to the city? It comes to a complete halt. Or I'll go even further than that. They say it's made primarily in Mexico. And, oh, by the way, it also is not handicap accessible. You would say to yourself, there must be something here we're missing. Yes, it is the desire for a bumper sticker, for a giant ad campaign at Kennedy Airport, how they're all going to look the same. Well, ask Commissioner Kelly if he thinks it's a good idea to have one type of police car. When you walk down the street, you probably see 9 different kinds, because he's no dummy. Not to imply that anyone's a dummy. Let me stipulate that I'm not calling everyone else a dummy. I'm just saying that there are smart decisions and not very smart decisions. And what it comes down to is this, the idea that you started your introduction with a forward-looking administration. It is. I like David Yesterday, but frankly, a lot of the decisions have had the smell of a pre-cooked decision that came out of City Hall that said, we want this fancy thing that fits into some narrative about how we're transforming the city. Go get it. And, quite frankly, smart decision-making got left at the doorstep of the TLC. Now, you said what would change? Well, first of all, since this car won't exist on January 1, 2014, I won't have to stop it from rolling. But I will certainly say we're not going to take every other car off the road or start the idea of phasing out cars. If something comes along in 3 years, in the third year of a Wiener administration, that is maybe not hybrid, maybe not alternative, something we don't even see coming yet, I'm not going to say, oh, we can't do that because we have to have this clunker from Nissan. I'm going to say, welcome aboard, let's give it a try.
Thank you. Thank you, Ira.